We're talking lavender today on Pots and Trowels, and that's brought to you with the support of Cobra Garden and Darlac. Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels. Well, I'm in the border today just doing a little bit of work on the lavender, and this is the perfect time to take cuttings if you want to increase the number of plants that you've got. And here we are now, middle of September. Weather is cooling down, we're getting some rain, we're still getting a nice bit of sunshine. Today's a lovely bright day, but everything is now starting to slow down, and it's the perfect time to take not only lavender but lots of other shrubs in the garden, things like rosemary and lavender and evergreens as well, and sage, all good to take at this time of the year. And it's what we call semi-ripe cuttings, so that's what we're going to do. But just before that, if you've got lavender in the garden, and when we planted this border back in spring, it's mainly herbs in here with some lovely flowers for pollinators in between them as well. And we put a few lavenders dotted along the border, and to say they were really small plants when they went in, after just one summer they've made a decent size. It is a dwarf lavender anyway, so it's never going to get huge. It had a fair amount of flower, and we can see the seed pods there from the flowers that it had this summer. It's actually, looking at it, just starting to produce one or two new flower buds there. It's decided for whatever reason that I want to flower twice this year. They do that occasionally, but it won't be a full bloom of flower on it. So what you can do with them at this time of the year, and you've got two choices. Traditionally, what we would do after flowering and the flowers have faded, we would go along and we would snip off all of those old flower stalks back down to where they started. Don't just snip the heads off, otherwise you've got a dead stalk. So you need to cut them back down into the plant. And that means all the energy goes into the plant, but it tidies them up more than anything. But if you don't want to do that, you can leave on the old seed heads, leave them over winter. It's a very small seed in a lavender seed head. They will fall to the floor, and small seed-eating birds like the finches will scratch around and get some. So it's entirely up to you how you do it. And you can also shorten any long growths, just give them a bit of a gentle, light tidy up, but you would never prune them too hard down into the plant, because what we do then is in the spring, we will give it another tidy up, and that will then promote the new growth that will flower for us next summer. But when you come in to take the cuttings, what we're looking for is this, what we call secondary growth. This is a flush of growth that's happened after flowering, and it's made, as you can see, several inches. And if I can hold that there, we can see there we've got the original wood that's now gone brown, and then this new piece of growth here. And it's now just starting to firm up. It's not too soft, it's not too sappy. And that is ideal for a cutting. So I'm actually going to cut it down just slightly into that older wood. There, it's got some buds there at the tip that will grow next year. So it will actually encourage it to bush out. So I'm just going to select a few of these cuttings. That's a good cutting there. Off the plant. And then what I'll do is take them into the greenhouse and show you how to prepare them and hopefully root them. Rooting your lavender cuttings is very easy, and you normally get a good percentage that root. To actually root them, you need a container to put them in, and I like to use these cell trays. These are plastic trays. You can use them time and time again, just brush them over, get rid of any compost. They come in various sizes, and I like this one. This is a 20 cell tray, quite little holes in there, which is ideal really. We don't want anything too big for our cutting, because if it's got a big volume of compost, it can get very wet, and then they can just literally rot off before the roots are produced. You could use little fibre pots, you know, a couple of cuttings in one of these fibre pots. That's a good way to do it as well. Or just a traditional small, you know, this is a 3.5 inch, 9 centimetre plastic pot. I would place several cuttings around the edge of that. And a really good way to do it is if you've got some small terracotta pots they're good because they're porous and they don't get too wet. So you probably gathered from what I'm saying is that lavender cuttings don't want to be too wet and soggy over the autumn and winter when they're rooting. So again, these pots are ideal. Compost again is important. If you buy just a multi-purpose compost, it can sometimes get quite wet. It's very fibrous and it can hold on to the moisture, which is great in the summer, but when we don't need too much water, then we've got to do other things to it. So what I've done here, I've got some multi-purpose compost and I've mixed in some perlite, and you can see the perlite are the white little balls in there. It's an expanded volcanic rock. It allows good drainage, but it also allows air porosity around the base of the cuttings, which encourages roots to develop. You could use grit or a coarse sand, that would work equally as well. So what I'll do, I'm going to fill my container first and then we can insert the cuttings when I've prepared them. So just loosely fill the compost into your pots or your trays. We don't want to firm it too much, so just a little bit of pressure, level it off, give it a tap, just get rid of that surplus there. And that is ideal. Need my dibber and then we can prepare the cuttings. So these are the growth that we've taken off the lavender there. We can see the new growth that it's made. So we want it to be what we call semi-ripe. So not woody, but not too soft and sappy like the top. So you could use a knife for this, but I like to use these little sort of scissor type snips. These are great. So I'm going to cut it fairly low down where the growth started, because that's where it's just starting to firm up a little bit. Just below a pair of leaves. It's what we call a leaf node. So we're going to cut it just below, and that's made a lovely clean cut. And then you could use your fingers to take all these leaves off individually, but very often, if you're careful, you can hold the cutting at the top and just strip them off as you pull your finger down like that. So just practice it. If you find that tricky, just take them off by hand. And all we need to do is leave sort of a rosette of leaves at the top. If we leave too many on, they lose moisture before roots form, and we certainly don't want any of those leaves to be under the compost. Now that I think is just a little bit long. I ideally want them about 2 to 3 inches maximum. So I'm actually going to just trim that. Again, the wood is still firmish there, and that is the perfect cutting. So I'll do one more and then we'll insert them. So cut it just below a leaf joint, strip off some of these lower leaves, either by pulling them down or removing them, and that is it. It's as simple as that. If the top growth is very soft, it's probably an indication it's too early to take them, but what you can do is also just pinch the tip out if you wanted to, and then when they root, these little buds in between the leaf and the stem, they will form a new head on it. So there they are prepared. I'll do those. So if we get our tray here, so filled with compost, use a dibber. You don't need any rooting powders or anything like that on these at all. And you can probably just push these in actually, because they're firm enough to push in. Otherwise, use a dibber, make a hole, put your cutting in and just lightly firm it. So really simple. And we want it in so there's about 1 inch at least down in the compost. So that much would be buried below. Doesn't matter if it's a tad more, and just very lightly firm them in so that it just gives them a bit of anchorage into the compost like that. And then what we need to do with them is give them a drink, and I will fill this tray with some more. We're going to have lots of lavender next year. Give them a drink with some water, and then they need to be stood somewhere out of direct sunlight. You could do it outside if you've got a shady part of the garden. I'm going to put them in the greenhouse where there's some shade netting and they won't get the direct sun on them, and just keep them moist, not over wet. They don't root in weeks. It can take a couple of months. A cold frame in the garden again would be ideal for them. But what you don't want to do is to put them in a propagator that's enclosed where it gets very wet and very humid, because the foliage will just get too wet and it will then start to rot off. So they do need that air circulation, and by keeping them moist, by next spring I will be able to, hopefully, fingers crossed, pop those out and they will all have a really good root system. And I would hope that if I take 10 cuttings, I'll get at least 7 or 8 of them are going to root, and then we can grow them on and get new plants in the garden for free. Well, thank you for watching Pots and Trowels, and remember you can catch up on all the videos we've done in the past on our YouTube channel. Just search for Pots and Trowels, where you can subscribe for free. Next time I'm going to plant a container that will give you colour and interest through the autumn and into winter. So we'll see you then. Bye.